Today is going to be a question and answer session. Please send us your questions. I will present a topic at the beginning here. Then as we move on, we'll address your questions as they come in. Hopefully we can get to all of the questions in we'll have about 45 minutes to an hour to go over your questions. First, I'd like to talk about QuickBooks class tracking. QuickBooks class tracking is specific to QuickBooks. However, ACCTivate can integrate with QuickBooks class tracking. What it is it's a way to categorize transactions within QuickBooks. Currently, ACCTivate integrates with QuickBooks class tracking on the sales side. QuickBooks class tracking can be linked to the invoice and the invoice detail. The invoice header would include items such as branch, salesperson, and customer type. For example, every invoice will be linked to either a branch, a salesperson, or a customer type. The invoice detail will include branch, sales category, product class, salesperson, or customer type. For both of these, the invoice detail and the invoice header, you can link one of these items to a QuickBooks class. As an example, and I'm going to show you this report, it's the profit and loss by class. I'll circle around and come back to this later on. First, I'll explain how we got to this point. But the profit and loss by class is similar to your profit and loss report, which is probably familiar to most of you. On the left, we have our rows that are income and expenses. What's different here is we have different columns now. The profit and loss by class has 4 columns here: retail, wholesale, unclassified, and total. Retail and wholesale are classes that I created in QuickBooks and integrated in with ACCTivate. In this particular example, retail and wholesale are customer types. I'm also going to set up another class for my branches, and I'll demonstrate where that'll come into play a little bit later on. Again, you take a look at this, I'll tell you how I got to this point, and I'll explain it in more detail when we get back to it. So here's my QuickBooks company. To create a class, I went to List, Class List. Here I set up 4 classes. Again, I have my retail and wholesale at the bottom. Those are my 2 customer types. And then I also set up one called Dallas and one called Fort Worth. Those are my branches. Then in ACCTivate, after I run a sync, I would go to Configuration Manager, go to the Sales Order section, and then to the Sales and Cost of Goods Sold section. On the right, you'll see QuickBooks Class Tracking. If you're looking there now and you don't have it, it's because you don't have Class Tracking enabled QuickBooks. So first you would need to enable Class Tracking, run a sync, and this option will appear. Once it appears, you can choose which class in QuickBooks you want to link to the invoice header and which class you want to link to the invoice detail line. So for example, I chose that I want my invoice header to be linked to the branch, which in this case will be Dallas or Fort Worth, and the invoice detail lines will be linked to the customer type, which was retail or wholesale. Once I choose that, it'll create a new column under the customer type section of the Configuration Manager. So here I have my customer types, retail and wholesale. Now I have a new column called Class Name because I chose that my invoice detail lines would be linked to a QuickBooks class. In the Class Name field, I choose the class that I set up in QuickBooks. Again, I named them the same as my customer type. So my class Retail is linked to my customer type Retail, and my class name Wholesale is linked to my customer type Wholesale. Since I set my invoice header information to be linked to the branches, I have a new section that appears at the bottom of my branch called Class Selection. We can only see Dallas, but I did this for Fort Worth also. I set the Dallas branch to be linked to the class name Dallas, and the Fort Worth branch to be linked to the class name Fort Worth. This is something that's not required. However your product classes are set up, if they're linked to the income and cost of goods sold, is fine. But I wanted to show you how this could be used in combination with different product classes and even product classes linked to different income and cost of goods sold accounts. So I have a product class Large linked to my large income account and large cost of goods sold. And I have a product class called Small linked to small income and small cost of goods sold. So now what I did is I have 2 customers, ABC and Industrial Supplies. If you look at ABC, the customer type is set to retail and their default branch is set to Dallas. Industrial Supplies is the complete opposite. Customer type is wholesale and the branch is the Fort Worth branch. Since we've assigned these customer types to these customers, the class will be associated with this customer. So I created 2 sales orders. Here's the first one for ABC, and you can see in the green boxes that the default branch is D. Certainly you could change that if necessary. The customer type is retail, and this particular product that I'm selling, customer ABC, has the product class Small, which again is linked to the small income and small cost of goods sold. For our industrial supplies, same thing. Branch is Fort Worth, customer type is wholesale, and the product class for this product is large. So after I invoice both these orders and run a sync, this is the end result. I have my profit and loss by class report here. What we can see is the item that had the large income, the large product class, is linked to the large income account and is also linked to the wholesale branch. The small income item was for the customer that was using the retail customer type, and so they fall into their own category, the retail class. So what this allows us to do, it gets a little bit more granular. You can still run your profit and loss, your standard profit and loss, but here if you wanted to see a more specific breakdown, you could do the profit and loss by class to show you your retail customer income and expenses for your net income, and your wholesale customers, giving you the net income of your wholesale customers. Anything that did not have, if for instance you have a customer that has a customer type that is not linked to a class, that would fall under the unclassified column. You could certainly correct that if you needed to. This example, I use customer type. Another good example might be salesperson. You could have these same columns by salesperson. The invoice detail items are what's going to show up here. So salesperson, you could also have branch on this one as well. Now the next one, the next slide here is another report. It's the open invoices report. On the previous slide we saw that the columns were related to the customer type and the rows were related to the product class. But as you probably noticed, I set a class to the branch. Here you can see, since that's at the header level, you can see that the branch Dallas is linked to this class Dallas. So when I look at the invoice for ABC on the first row there, I can see that that fell under the class Dallas, and the second customer, industrial supplies, fell under the Fort Worth class. There's different reports, different filters in QuickBooks you can use. I'm not going to go on all that, but you can add in the classes a column on some of the reports. So to kind of summarize this, class tracking just provides another level of financial reporting in QuickBooks. Profit and loss now may be sufficient for your needs, but if you want to see a more granular breakdown, you want to see it by customer type or even salesperson, this would be a good way to go. And you still have access to all your standard reports in QuickBooks, so if your accountant is familiar with just looking at the profit and loss, the standard profit and loss, you can still print that one out. It's separate from the profit and loss by class. Enabling class tracking isn't going to change any of that. Again, when you look in Configuration Manager, if you don't see class tracking, you just need to set up the classes in QuickBooks, run a sync, and then you'll see them, and then you can go with it from there. Whenever you test out something like this, major change to financial reporting, or just, if you're not sure about what you're doing, how you want to set this up, I would recommend that you try it in your practice company first. Everyone should have a practice company. Go in there, you can set it up different ways. That way you don't have to worry about messing up anything in QuickBooks, especially since this requires that you sync to see how the information goes back and forth. Definitely would try this out in your practice company until you find something you like. Once you get to that point, then you can set it up in your live company, and I think this will really help you. Okay, so hopefully during this time we've gotten some questions. I'm going to pass this off to Mike Elliott. Again, he's an implementation specialist here, and he will go over some other topics and some of your questions.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Elliott. Again, I work in implementations with Brad. We got a lot of questions about if we can add a box or something like that to a sales order or to a purchase order, or maybe you want to add more information onto a line item on a sales order. Any kind of questions we get like that, I usually refer people to custom fields. So I'm just going to show you a quick demo on how you use that and create that. So if you need to add, let's say, a new line of information you want on a sales order, choose Configuration Management and go to Custom Fields, and this is available to everyone. From here, we can decide what area of ACCTivate that we want this custom field on. So you can choose from purchase orders, the detail line on a purchase order, business activities, customers, products. For this, I'm going to do sales order. And what we'll do next is we'll define what kind of custom field we want in there. So I'm going to hit add and type in, let's say we want to add in warranty. Put it again here. And then we choose the type of custom field we want. We can choose a text field, a numeric field, currency, checkbox. I'll show you how we can do lists here in a second, or you can choose a date field. For this, I'll choose a date, and again, I'll click Add. Save that. And now when we go back into the sales order, we pick customer. This tab will pop up and be created here called Custom. From here we can pick what date we want the warranty. You can choose to a future date. Save it, and it'll stay attached to this sales order. If you wanted to, you could also have this appear on your report, your sales order report that you print for the customer. To do that, you would either need to get with someone in your company that's familiar with Crystal reports, or get in touch with a third-party Crystal report writer. So any custom fields you do have created in here, you can always have the option to have those appear on a report. I'll go over one more bit of information in custom fields. You also have the option to create a list. You can call it whatever you want. Let's say signature list. Hit OK, and then we can choose whatever we want to appear in this list. So I can put my name. I could put Brad. All right, we'll go ahead and create a custom field that'll show up in. We'll put it also on a sales order. We'll create a new one, call it signature. Choose the type, which will be list, and then we can pick what list and how long each one will be on there. So I'll choose 20 characters we want to show, and the list ID, which is signature. We'll add that. Save. And now when we head back to a new sales order in our custom tab, we have a new area called signature, and we can pick from those drop-down boxes. So sometimes, people like to have, you might need to approve a sales order. I've seen some people that like to use a signature custom field for something like that. So yeah, again, and these can all appear on Crystal reports, on your sales order reports. The next thing I'm going to go over is email templates. Again, it's maybe something some of you use, maybe you know about it, but just aren't using it. I think it comes in handy if you want to have your order numbers or anything like that appear on an email template. So we'll go to a new sales order, choose a customer, and then what we'll do is we can choose on this print order here, we'll go to email order. This will bring up an email message, and we can choose template from here and manage message templates. I'll click on new to create a new one, and we'll just call this sales order. For the subject, maybe you want it to be order number, and now let's say we want the actual order number to appear in the subject line that they're using. To do that, we can go to help.activate.com, and you can type in email template fields. It should be the first article that comes up, and this will give us a list of all the different codes that we can use. So we'll choose, since we're on the sales orders, we'll choose sales order quote fields, and now we have a list of all the different fields that we can have automatically pop up in an email template. So for that order line, I want order number to appear when sending an email. So I'll type in order number, and maybe in the body we want to put hello and then the customer's name. So we'll look up that. Let's say we want that to be the sold to name. So we'll just type in sold to name in the field. And again, you can put more and more information in here. I could build this out to say, specifically the price you owe, any ship to information. You can go through that list and choose whatever you want to put in here. For now, I'll save it, and I'm going to make it available to all users. You could make this specific to yourself, though, if you wanted your own email signatures in there. And I'll save it. So now if we come in, into a sales order and we want to use that template, again, I'll go to email order. I'll choose the template, sales order, and you can see in the subject it's going to say order number, auto-populates with the actual order number, and hello, ABC Services. Again, though, you can choose any field you want on there that you want to auto-populate, save it as a template, and it's just a good, quick way. Instead of having to type all that out in an email, you can just have it automatically come in. All right, we're going to take a look at a couple of the questions here. First one we have up there, someone wanted to know about updating vendor pricing using a CSV file, if it's possible, and how you would do it. Yes, it is possible. You can do it with either a CSV file or an Excel file. What you would do is you'd come into File, go to Import Data. You would choose the product and create mapping. You're familiar with, from there on you would choose your Excel or CSV file, and then go to the Columns tab and Product Supplier. You can map the, scroll down there, you can map the price there, the vendor name, if you have product vendor ID, any notes, prices, last price. You can map all of that to the Excel file, and then you'll also need to map the product ID itself so it knows what product to use for the vendor. And then it's as simple as hitting begin import and going through the process of actually importing it.
Okay, I'm going to answer a question here. It's Brad again, relating to returned inventory. The question is, how's the best way to handle inventory that's been returned back to you, possibly damaged? Depending on what your business is, you may be able to repair and move it back into your regular inventory, or maybe damage, you receive it in and scrap it out or something. What I would recommend would be to create an additional warehouse, a returns warehouse. You can name it whatever you want. It could be RMA warehouse, for instance. What you would do at that point is when you create the credit memo, if you want to receive it back into that warehouse, you would do a P line type item, and I can show you that. So here we have a credit memo. Let's say I choose customer, do ABC, and I want to receive in button. The P line type will receive it back into inventory, whereas if we were to choose an in line type, we'll give the credit, but we're not going to actually return it back into the warehouse. So P line type will actually increase the quantity of whatever warehouse is chosen here. I actually only have F&D set up right now, but if we had set up a returns warehouse, you would receive it back into that. The benefit of this would be a couple of reasons. One, it keeps it isolated from your inventory. So in your D warehouse, let's say that you had 10 in there and you received in one damaged one into your returns warehouse. Overall you'd have 11. However, you'd see that you actually have 10 that are sellable. They're in good condition. The other advantage would be that returns warehouse would be linked to its own GL accounts. So it could have a separate inventory asset account, or even separate, separate inventory adjustment GL accounts. So in the event that something was returned to you and you normally try and repair it and then transfer it back into your normal warehouse to be sold, if that's not possible, if it's a completely damaged item and you need to create an inventory adjustment, you could have a specific inventory adjustment GL account set up for that warehouse. So for instance, it might be something like returned but unrepairable, something like that. So to set that up, we just go to the inventory warehouse. I think everybody's familiar with how to create a new warehouse, but we would need to set up the inventory GL account, the purchases GL account, adjustments, and gain loss for those. And again, one other thing, if you have the business activities module, definitely receiving it into a returns warehouse makes sense, because then you can create a business activity to track what repairs need to be done before it can either be returned back to the customer, if that's the case, or moved back into the standard warehouse. There's another question on here kind of relating to the warehouse. What's the best way to do consignment sales? That's a really good question. We can handle consignment, and it might be a little difficult to demonstrate the full setup here, but in that case, I'll go ahead and create a new warehouse for that. The key here is that we're going to create a warehouse, but it's not going to use your standard GL accounts. The consignment warehouse is actually going to use an expense account that you will create in QuickBooks. So you might create an expense account called consignment warehouse. Now, and when I'm talking about consignment, I'm talking about inventory that you receive from your vendor that you're holding on consignment. You want to keep it separate from your books, but you want to be able to sell it, record the income, and then pay for it and the cost of goods sold. The other version of consignment would be, you're giving your inventory to someone on consignment. In that case, you could set up another standard inventory for your customer. So let's say I'm giving out $1,000 worth of inventory to customer John Smith. In that case, I would create a warehouse for John Smith. That would really be the best way to handle it. Transfer it in there, so that way it's still on your books. Your inventory asset account and everything would be set up for it. It's still on your books. You can see how much is there. When they come back and they tell you how much they used, you just create a sales order to John Smith, sell them the 40 or whatever they sold. In this scenario, though, what we want to do is we would choose an expense account for inventory, purchases, adjustment, and gain loss. And again, we'd create an expense account in QuickBooks, run a sync, choose it here. So what that'll allow us to do is once you create that expense account, when you receive an inventory, because of double entry accounting, there's going to be two transactions. There's going to be, let's say we receive $100 in inventory, it's going to affect the inventory GL account and the accrued purchase receipts GL account, these first two. However, since we have an expense account, it'll actually offset. So if the $100 goes into our consignment expense account, it'll increase it by $100, but it'll immediately reduce it by $100 because that expense account will also be set in the purchases. So I'll go ahead and set up, I don't have an expense account for consignment set up, I don't believe. So yeah, let's see, I don't think I have one. So we'll just say it's a other expense for now. And so it would look something like this. So in that case, again, I've received in the inventory. It'll increase other expenses, but then immediately decrease other expenses because that's the offsetting GL account. It'll give you a zero net in that account. So again, it's isolated from your inventory asset account. Then when you receive your invoice from your vendor, you would enter that into the PO. So this would all start from a PO. You would create the PO, receiving the inventory. Once you sell the item, let's say I sell 2 of them, I would go back to the PO. On the invoice, I would change the approved quantity to be 2. What that'll do is it'll increase your accounts payable. It'll have an offsetting entry on the purchases GL account, and it'll increase accounts payable. And then once I sold it to the customer, it'll increase the income and cost of goods sold by the amounts of the cost which you'll get from the vendor invoice. It's very complex. It would take me a while to set it up. I don't really want to waste a lot of time on it. We do have a way to handle it. There is an article on our help site on consignment inventory I'd recommend taking a look at. But basically, I just want to show you this. You'll want to set it up to be other on all of these, and then once you sell those items, you'll just go back to the purchase order, and the purchase invoice will enter in the approved quantity.
All right, it's Michael again. I'm going to go over a couple more questions. Somebody was asking if we were planning on developing an iPhone app, and I get that a lot in implementation. If we're planning on doing any kind of apps for mobile, a lot of people need to be able to go out in the field, either on an iPad or some tablet, and maybe take sales orders. Right now we don't have any apps, but a good way that I've talked to a lot of people I've worked with to handle this is to, you can get from us the web store integration. You can create a separate web store from your main one if you already have one, or just create your own web store that's only accessible to your salespeople, and we can integrate that directly with ACCTivate, so they can go out in the field and through that website take any sales orders, see product inventory, can see how much inventory is on hand, how much is left. So that's a good way to handle it right now. Since we don't have any mobile apps, you can use a web store in that same way. Another question, if you could use multiple units of measure on a sales order or PO. They were asking, they're currently using pounds and they want to sell by eaches. I'll touch on that just real quick because there's a lot of setup to it, and we have a pretty lengthy webinar that goes over that. But essentially what you would do is in configuration management first, you would need to set up the relationship from pounds to eaches, and you would do that in the product category, units of measure. You can see all the different units of measure we have created here. So you'd want to set it up, for example, here we go, for weight. We've already got one set up. We've got a relationship set up to be weight, saying there's 15 pounds in a case. Now, if that differs over from product to product, you can set that to be product specific. So if you chose product specific, we could go to the product itself and define, maybe there's 17 pounds in some cases or 20 pounds in a case. So we can set that up on the product itself. Off the top of my head, I don't know of one that would be set up like that, but we'll see if I get lucky here. So you could choose, in this case, since we have relationships defined, you could choose to sell it by a case, this product button, and it's going to show 20 here. If we needed to change that, we could put it, say there's 15 eaches in a case. Save that, and you could do the same thing for purchasing. So I see a lot of people purchase in a case, stock it by an each, and then sell it by a pack. So those are all things you can set up, and we do have another webinar that actually goes over that even more in depth, but that's just a quick way you could set that up.
All right, this is Brad again. There's a good question on here about marketing lists versus marketing code. We'll take a look at that. Again, one of the purposes of this is to hopefully teach you guys something new that maybe you're not familiar with. There's a lot of little bells and whistles that aren't required, and as an example, one of those is the marketing list and marketing code. So the marketing list is a way to find out the best way to reach your customer. So for instance, we have a marketing list on the screen here that shows catalog, dealer, regular mailings, newsletter. You can assign these to a customer. You can have multiple marketing lists for each customer, or you could have one customer may be assigned catalog. I'll show you that in a second. The marketing list here, so let's go back to a customer. We'll choose Apex as one of my customers. And whenever we come over here, we have, under the Sales tab, we have Marketing List. This is the full list from the Configuration Manager we just looked at. However, like I said, we could assign multiple marketing lists to this customer. So let's say they're a dealer, I want to send them a catalog. There are customers, I don't need to send them a prospective mailings, but maybe I want to include them on my special promotions. The reason you would do this, again, is to target your customer with the appropriate marketing materials. When we go over to customer and then create mailing list, we have a little wizard here that will allow us to figure out which customers we want to include in a particular mailing list. So if I click the add button, I can choose a filter here. So let's say I want to send something out to all the customers that have Judy Jones as the salesperson. And then I also want to send it to all of my customers that are using the marketing list catalog. So what this will tell me is that I want to send the catalog out to all of Judy Jones's customers. So let's take a look at that list. I believe it's only going to be a couple. So here's my two customers, Abercrombie and Smith, and then Apex Properties. It pulls in their address. It gives you a chance to review it here. If you need to take a look at anything, you can click the View button to open up the customer window. If I'm happy with everything here, which I know these two customers are both customers of Judy Jones and both on that catalog mailing list, I can click Next. I can put in a note here, and I'll show you where this appears. This appears back in the customer window. So if I say, let's say mailing list catalog, I click Next. So my two customers are selected. I can export this out. If I want to save this on my desktop, say mailing list. I'll just call it mailing. So export it. It'll save it as a CSV file. So now I can hit finish. If I go back to Apex and I look at the customer Apex, on the customer tab, I have my note down here, list mailing list catalog. So that note, whatever you type in there will appear as a note on the customer window with the text that you put in there. So it'll give you an idea of when you sent the mailing. Now that you have that CSV file, you can actually import that into Microsoft Word as mailing labels using mail merge. It varies, I believe, depending on which version of Microsoft Office you're running, but you can find instructions online. It's been pretty simple when I've looked at it before. As far as finding the instructions, it's just mail merge using a spreadsheet. And it is a CSV, but it'll have it in there. Really, once you get that, you can create your mailing labels, print it out on the different, Avery or whatever size labels you have. So that covers the mailing list. So using those filters like I did, the salesperson and the marketing list, is a great way to target a specific group of customers to send them whatever you need to send them, or just to come up with a list if you have something else you can do with it. Now the marketing codes, if we go back to Configuration Manager, under sales order, we have marketing code. So here, marketing codes are specific to a sales order, and you can use these however you'd like, but I would think of these as how the order came to you, or how the customer maybe came to you. Your friend, magazine, newspaper, other, radio, television, yellow pages. So we're going to take a look at a sales order. And let's say I create one for Apex. So I'll type in the customer Apex, and then here's where I'll choose my marketing code. If I choose friend, this will fall under the friend category. Now, where do you see this information? It's under a report. If you go to report, it's under customer information, customer sales report. So it's marketing analysis by customer. So I hit select, hit preview. Most of these appear unclassified. However, Abercrombie here is a good example of newspaper total. So it's not specific to a customer, it's more specific to an order. So Abercrombie, you may sell them, you may create 5 different orders, and they could each have their own marketing code. It would give you a total for each of those marketing codes, and then at the bottom it would give you total orders for that customer. So that's where this comes into play. It's pretty useful for that kind of information to see what is the best way to reach your customers. Again, you can use that in conjunction with your mailing list. If you find that all your customers are coming in through flyers you had sent out, then you know on your mailing list that maybe you should include more customers on the mailing list.
All right, had somebody ask if we could review the procedure for integrating labor cost into a BOM. I'll try to quickly go through that. The first thing you'd want to do is set up a labor product. I'll see if we already have one. Good. So we have it set by the hour right now, the stocking unit. You could have that set to each if you just wanted one standard labor cost. So for example, we wanted to add this onto a assembly product. Choose, I think there's a, yeah. We can look at the components that go into this executive work table: leg, paint, and a tabletop. Now let's say we want to add labor charges onto that. We'll choose edit, labor charges, and we have it right now set to quantity. It's going to use up 1 hour. The price, if we look at that labor product, it's going to be 25. So we could have that assembly so that it uses always just that one labor cost. It's always going to be $25 that you use, or you could change the stocking or the price to be $1. If you set the list price to be $1, you can put you can change the quantity on each assembly that you use. So if you wanted it to be $50 one time, you could change it to be 50 stocking units, whatever that is, hour each, and it'll change that and use the list price of $1 times 50 to make it $50 worth. That's just one way that you can do that. Is it possible to reopen line items for a PO that's been completed? No, it's not. Once it's been completed, your option is either to void the invoice and reopen it that way, or copy and create a new one. Yeah, how do I enter AP invoice once entered? Yeah, you could just, you'd have to void it. You could edit it in QuickBooks, or you could void it in ACCTivate. If you edit it in QuickBooks and run a sync, you might get a warning letting you know that it was edited in QuickBooks, but that warning will disappear after the next sync.
Okay, we've got some great questions. I'm gonna go over inventory management, specifically reordering inventory. We do have modules for special order and drop ship, which allow you to create a purchase order from a specific sales order, specifically a line from a specific sales order. Even if you don't have that, you can set inventory levels, which will allow you to monitor your inventory, and it'll prompt you when you need to reorder. So I'm taking a look at the product button on the screen right now. For each warehouse, so D and F, there is a section off to the bottom right, the minimum stock quantity, minimum order quantity, maximum stock quantity, and reserved. Reserved removes inventory and removes it from your available inventory. So for instance, right now the available is 290. If I put in reserved, say I put in 10, let me type that in there, and then save it. The available for the D warehouse dropped to 280. So reserved is a way if you need to pull out some inventory, you don't want it to ever be available for sale. The only way to get it back available is to, again, edit the reserved quantity to reduce that. So here I'll change it back to be 0, and it'll add it back into the available amount. So the minimum stock quantity and the maximum stock quantity are levels that you prefer your inventory to be at for this particular warehouse. So the minimum stock quantity for the warehouse D is 300. The available quantity is currently 290. So since the available has fallen below the minimum stock quantity, it'll prompt you that you need to reorder. To see that prompt, I'll go to Business Alerts. I'll click on the Inventory Management tab, and it'll appear on this list. Now, we have a lot of information, so I'm going to filter this down. I'm going to choose the D warehouse, and then I'm currently sorting by the column Product ID. So here we see that we have button. I have available 290, as we can see right here, which was below my 300. So that's why it appears on here. Once I get it back over that 300, it'll be removed from this list. If we switch back over to the product, since the maximum stock quantity is 750, ACCTivate is going to recommend that we order a quantity that'll get us up to that maximum. So in this case, that would be 460. So if I pull this up again, the suggested quantity, as you can see in this column, is 460. So looking at this, I know that I need to reorder, and it's going to suggest that quantity. However, I don't actually have to order that amount. That's just the suggested quantity based on those maximums. So, I would set a maximum that makes sense for you, but certainly you don't have to stick to it. So once I'm ready to reorder, so now I know that I'm below, I want to order to get back up to my maximum. I'll click reorder, which will add in all these check boxes to the left of the products. In this case, I'm going to check off black button, and I have a preferred supplier set up for black button, and the preferred supplier is Good Stuff. However, I also have equipment repair set up, so I'm going to choose equipment repair for whatever reason. And so since I changed it, it's going to use the vendor's cost that is set up on the vendors tab. Now the PO quantity, again, it's going to make that suggested 460. It automatically populates with that, but I'm at 290. I just really want to get it back to 300, so I can say I only want to put 10 in here. I could check off multiple ones. It'll group items based on the supplier. In this case, I just want to do this one item. I can hit Create POs to create the purchase order. I also have the option to print a proof out if I need to do that, but in this case, I'm going to click Create POs. Click yes. I've just created a purchase order for that particular product. It removed it from my list now because I've created the purchase order that's going to get it back up to above the minimum stock quantity. Another thing to consider on that is it'll actually make a recommendation. We have an article on our help site about how it calculates some of the information. If the minimum order quantity was 500, but it's recommending I order 460 to get to my max stock quantity, it'll actually change it to be 500. So whichever is greater, either the minimum order quantity or the amount that it would take to get to that maximum stock quantity. Everybody has the ability to do this, though. Again, I mentioned the special order wizard. Those are different modules. This is something that you could go through. You may not be currently using. You can set up those min and max, and it'd be useful for something like this. So there's a question on here about receiving on a mobile device with purchase orders. Yes, you can do that. That is something I'm not really set up to show you on this screen, but to answer your question, there is a way. I would recommend that contact either our sales team if you don't have mobile, or if you currently do have mobile and you're just having trouble figuring it out, you can contact our support team. We can help you out with that. it's pretty straightforward, but one of the advantages of using the mobile device is that you can scan in items as you receive them or manually type them in, but you can do it without having to go to a workstation. It can all be done from the mobile device.
Somebody was asking about hosting, possibly moving their server to the cloud or to a hosting provider. If you were to do that, there's some questions that you would probably want to get with them about and talk to your IT staff before you do something like that. We work really with any single tenant server. There's multiple tenant servers where they have multiple companies on a server out there. We work with a couple of those, but generally it's only single tenant. You would want to talk to your IT staff because sometimes there's restrictions of the folders that we can get to on a hosted server. For example, sometimes they don't let us into the program data file, certain program files. So you just want to kind of get an idea of what your permissions are going to be for a hosted company, and just make sure your current IT staff is good with that. For example, like if you use mobile on your current server and you wanted to switch to a hosting provider, it's a little difficult to set that up. It's not something that we support, so it can be created, but again, it's something you have to work with your IT staff with.
For those of you using assemblies, there's a question here about labor on assemblies, and that's a really good question. If you want to include the cost of a labor in assembly, there is some additional configuration that needs to be done. By default, labor is not an inventoried item, it's a labor item. So for that reason, it's not tracking a cost or quantity with it, but we can do that. So the next step would be to go to Configuration Manager, Inventory, Warehouse. If you have multiple warehouses that you would be building the assembly in with labor, then we'll need to do this for each warehouse. But the GL accounts you see here are for the Inventory tab. However, you might notice there's a non-inventory tab in the background. What you would need to do is choose a cost offset account. Again, since we don't have costs associated with labor in terms of, you're not receiving it in, it's not an inventoried item, so it's not a fluctuating cost. We need to set up a offset expense account. So all that is in QuickBooks you would set up an expense account called labor. Once you did that, then what you could do is you could go to the labor item that you have set up in ACCTivate. So here I'm going to choose labor. And the cost method is set to none on this particular one, but now let's say I want to set it to be standard. So when I change it to be standard, this new field appears over here off to the right, and let's say I put in 15. So 15 would be the cost per stocking unit for this item. What ACCTivate does is when it sees that the item type is labor, the cost method is standard, and there's a standard cost set, it knows that it needs to use the labor cost offset account. So now what will happen is when I include labor as part of an assembly and I build that assembly, let's say there's two other components that total up to be $20. They're 10, 10, and then I add in my labor at 15. So now when I build that assembly, ACCTivate will see that the cost associated with labor is 15. That's the standard cost, and it'll include it as part of the cost of that assembly item. So once the assembly is built, the assembly will now have a value of $35. Now that 15's got to go somewhere once you sync with QuickBooks, and it actually goes over to that labor expense account that I just mentioned in Configuration Manager. So once we sync it, then you'll see an entry for $15 in the labor expense account. Now, there's different ways you can handle that going forward. It'll accumulate there until you do something to clear it out. Now you can see, for instance, maybe $15 is part of you have a third party who packs your products up, and they put your product in a box, and so your assembly is the box, the product, and the labor. And when you get your finished good, which is a boxed up item, you want that to have that $35 value, and you've reduced your box and your product by $10, and the labor has that $15 charge. So that's over in QuickBooks. You can link that to a vendor's bill. So when you get the bill from the packing company, in QuickBooks you would enter in the bill, and instead of having it point to accrued purchase receipts, it would point to that expense GL account. Otherwise, it'll accumulate and you can just see what your expense for labor is. But this is not a fluctuating cost, it's a standard cost, meaning whatever you set here will stay until you change it. So if you have labor that maybe cost different based on territory. So if you have a packing plant in California and a packing plant in Georgia, maybe they have different rates they charge, and so you might have a labor item for both of those. There's a good question here about what are export options so we can edit the data in Excel to re-import. That's a really good question. Our database is a SQL database. ACCTivate can be connected to Microsoft Excel, and a database query can be done in Excel to pull data from the ACCTivate database into Excel where you can manipulate it. It's read-only. It's not going to write anything back. So it's a really good way. I think it's the best way to export data out of the database and work with it. We have a couple of great articles and I believe even a longer webinar about how to do this. And I would definitely check into that. There's some basics. If you know you want to pull it from the product table, that's fine. If you need to join tables, it can get a little bit more complex, but I think our webinar addresses that. Another way you can do it would be if, sorry, let me open up a product again. If we're looking at button, there's a checkbox here that says available on web, and when that is checked, that means it's available to go on the website, so you can export it out. So if you go to export file, export product list, and then I choose the destination, I say product. Oops, let's say I put in product, or let's make sure we're pointing to the right spot. Sorry, I can do product here, save it. It'll export it out. It'll export all the products that have that available on the web. Now, that's not practical if you have 1,000 products and none of them are checked off as available on the web. You'd have to go in and manually do it. Unless you have a list of your products currently, then you could import in that list and have a field, set the default to be available on the web. But I strongly think, I feel pretty strongly that the Excel query is the best way to go to manipulate the data. It's real-time data, so once you connect Excel to the database, you can refresh it and it'll pull in any changes that have been made. If you add a new product, it'll include that. I think a lot of our customers are pretty comfortable in Excel. I have pretty good knowledge of it. So if you want to work with your data a little bit more, that would be the best way to go. And I would just recommend you go to help.activate.com/webinars to look at our webinars in the past where we have the Excel one. If we didn't answer something, or if we answered it but you have some more questions about it, feel free to let us know. You can create a support request, and either someone in our support department or implementation department will be happy to help you out. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.